Benvenuti scholars. So you decided that you're going to do a qualitative study for your dissertation, but do you know how to write your research problem statement? Have you figured out how to write your research question or your purpose statement? In this video, I'm going to go over 4 popular designs and give you an easy way to do just that. Write a research problem statement, a purpose statement, and a research question for each one of those. Quick disclaimer, there are many types of qualitative studies out there. Case studies come in different flavors. Phenomenology has different schools of thought. And for the purpose of this discussion, this is going to be a gross simplification of the process to get you started. And when you work with your chair and committee, it'll certainly refine and become more sophisticated. So let's get started. In our first example, we're going to talk about qualitative descriptive, and we're going to pull a real example from a recent graduate. And in this, you'll see that there's a simple mathematical formula, or the way I like to articulate a simple mathematical formula that you can replicate when putting together your problem statement. So if we accept that A equals physicians and X equals P4P programs, which is also part of this particular graduate's conceptual framework, and Y equals decision making, which was part of this graduate's theoretical framework, we come up with a simple problem statement that is, it was not known how physicians describe the influence of P4P programs on their decision making in the delivery of healthcare. Now pay attention to these colors, because this will be something that will help you as we continue on and build your own. Okay, so moving on to case studies, and I've put the descriptive example that we just discussed up in the top here so that you can follow along and see that we have a similar rhythm. This too is color-coded, and in this example we also use A and X and Y to help you understand and see this pattern. So again, if we accept that A equals co-teachers, and X equals 4 domains of collaboration, which is the theoretical or conceptual framework in this particular study, and Y equals teacher collaboration, we come up with a rather simple real-world problem statement that is from a graduate's dissertation. It was not known how co-teachers' perceptions of the 4 domains of teacher collaboration, dialogue, decision-making, action, and evaluation, influence teacher collaboration. Again, I'm going to put this up in the top bar for the next example, and you'll see this pattern as we continue. A student with whom I just worked and is in the prospectus phase, we're going to use hers as an example of a narrative problem statement. We have our previous examples of the descriptive and the case study above, and you'll see that we follow a similar rhythm. So again, if you accept that A equals Native American high school graduates, and X equals experiences, and Y equals K through 12 public school setting, we come up with a narrative research problem statement from a prospectus that's being developed now. It is not known how Native American high school graduates from a tribe in Arizona retell and reflect on their experiences in the K through 12 public school setting. We have everything up in the top for the previous examples. Before I get into phenomenological, I just want to remind you that, as I noted earlier, there are different kinds of phenomenological studies. So in this case, this student in this example leaned on Georgie's descriptive phenomenology. And if you are doing a phenomenological study, I encourage you to become an expert in the different schools of thought in this area. Again, this is for example purposes. Although it is a real example of a real graduate, it's important to note that there's different kinds of phenomenology lines of inquiry out there. So we'll follow the same pattern that we did before, and where in this case, A equals former religious cult members, X equals lived experiences, and Y equals spiritual abuse. So it is not known how former religious cult members in the United States describe their lived experiences of spiritual abuse. And again, you can see the same pattern repeating itself. So when you apply it to your research problem, if you simply fill in those blanks, depending on which design you're using, it should be somewhat straightforward. Okay, so let's practice your skill at creating qualitative problem statements. Let's start with descriptive. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to look at what we did and assume that we're now looking at doctoral students and how they see or how they experience my videos on their experience. So those are the elements of your problem statement for qualitative descriptive. So I'm going to give you 5 seconds to try your own hand at creating your qualitative descriptive problem statement. So go. All right, let's see how we did. So one way of doing this would be, it was not known how doctoral students described the influence of videos on their experience while pursuing their doctoral degrees. Now, in your case, if you haven't completed your process, this would still be in present tense or in future tense. So it wouldn't be described, it would be described. But hopefully you're starting to see the rhythm. Now let's try our hand with the same elements in regard to a case study. I'll give you about 5 seconds to try your hand at it, and then we'll see what I came up with. All right. So my example is, it was not known how doctoral students perceive the influence of videos on their experiences while pursuing their doctoral degrees. Now, how does that match up with what you came up with? Move it along as we take a look at the narrative using the same elements. Again, I'll give you 5 seconds to try your hand at this and see if you can snap those elements in as well. So let's go. All right, well, here's my example. It is not known how doctoral students retell and reflect on their experiences with videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees. And the last one, again, phenomenology. And as I've noted, there's different types of phenomenology, so you'll have to become versed in that. Let's give you 5 seconds to try your hand at phenomenology, and then we'll see what I came up with as an example. And go ahead and go. All right, so in my case, I came up with, it is not known how doctoral students describe the lived experience and make meaning of videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees online. How did you do? All right, now we're going to transition to part 2 of this discussion. And before we get into creating your own problem, purpose, and research question, let's talk about a simple way to articulate the purpose statement. We can look at it as a mathematical formula where the purpose equals the method plus the design plus the problem plus the sample plus the location. And as long as you have those elements in there, you should be able to construct a concise and clear purpose statement. Okay, so I provided an example of how you can break the purpose statement down into a mathematical formula. Let's get to work and start synthesizing these lessons and applying them. Specifically, we'll start with qualitative descriptive. And that purpose statement will simply be the method plus the design plus the problem statement of how do doctoral students describe the influence of videos on their experience while pursuing their doctoral degrees. The sample is doctoral students, and the location, which I'm making up for this argument, is a university cohort in the Northwestern United States. So as we continue on and put together our first example with the purpose statement, we hinge on some key words here. So you'll notice that the problem statement, it was not known how doctoral students describe the influence of videos on their experience while pursuing their doctoral degrees. That rolls into the following purpose statement. The purpose of this qualitative descriptive study is to explore how doctoral students describe the influence of videos on their experience while pursuing their doctoral degrees within a university cohort in the Northwestern United States. As you can see, each one of those Lego blocks that we pointed out on the previous screen manifest themselves here in a very simple and straightforward purpose statement. Hopefully what you'll start to see as we go through this process is that there's an actual pattern or rhythm that we follow. We used the real world examples, and now as you're starting to build your own, you'll see that this pattern will continue to go through the other designs as well. So we're using the problem statement, it was not known how doctoral students describe the influence of videos on their experience while pursuing their doctoral degrees. There's two ways we can translate this into the research question. A purely inductive process would simply come up with a research question that says, how do doctoral students describe the influence of videos on their experience while pursuing their doctoral degrees? But if you were to take more of a deductive approach and have the theoretical framework flow into the problem or into the research questions, then you would see the deductive method I have down there. And in this case, we're just, for argument's sake, using Herzberg's two-factor theory. And the two-factor theory in this case would deconstruct into two research questions. How do doctoral students describe the influence of videos on their motivating factors, challenging work, recognition, relationships, and growth potential while pursuing their doctoral degree? And we would go to the second one, how do doctoral students describe the influence of videos on their hygiene factors, status, job security, salary, and fringe benefits while pursuing their doctoral degrees? So these are two different approaches within the same design. And as you begin working with your chair and with your committee, they'll help you decide, or with the process of how you decide, which of those paths you choose. By now, you're probably noticing a bit of a rhythm. And as we move on to our example of a qualitative case study and its purpose statement, we're simply going to take the method plus the design, plus the problem statement, plus the sample, plus the location again. Now, in the case study example, it's important to look at the distinction in the words and how they differ. Again, as I noted earlier, there's different types of case studies. And this is just, again, an example to help you do this in the easiest way possible. And as you work with your chair and your committee, it'll probably refine from there. But this is here to help you get it started. So the problem statement that went from, it was not known how doctoral students perceive the influence of videos on their experiences while pursuing their doctoral degrees, translates now into a purpose statement. The purpose of this qualitative case study is to explore how doctoral students perceive the influence of videos on their experiences while pursuing their doctoral degrees within a university cohort in the Northwestern US. As we continue our discussion of a case study, you'll notice that this looks similar to the qualitative descriptive. And what I mean by that is you can follow an inductive process or a deductive inquiry with case studies as well. So the problem statement, it was not known how doctoral students perceive the influence of videos on their experiences while pursuing their doctoral degrees, now translates into an inductive inquiry of how do doctoral students perceive the influence of videos on their experience while pursuing their doctoral degrees. And the deductive approach, again, for this example, takes Herzberg's two-factor theory and breaks it up in how do doctoral students perceive the influence of videos on their motivating factors while pursuing their doctoral degrees, and how do doctoral students perceive the influence of videos on their hygiene factors while pursuing their doctoral degrees. Again, as I noted in the qualitative descriptive, how you make that decision will most likely come out of your interaction with your chair and your committee as they help you navigate the specifics of that process. Wait, am I repeating myself? Yep, yes I am. So as we move on to qualitative narrative purpose statement, again, you can see this same pattern develop where you're going to take your method, your design, but this time it's narrative. The previous times it was a case study or a qualitative descriptive, plus your problem statement, plus your sample, plus your location. We take that problem statement, it is not known how doctoral students retell and reflect on their experiences with videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees. And that translates into the purpose of this qualitative narrative study is to explore how doctoral students retell and reflect on their experiences with videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees within a university cohort in the Northwestern US. Again, the pattern follows, but we hinge on a couple keywords that tells the reader that this is a qualitative narrative study and that we're looking at how they retell and reflect on those experiences. Continuing with developing the research question for a narrative study, we now see something different than the qualitative, descriptive, and the case study. With narrative, we only have the inductive line of inquiry, so the theory is now used differently. And we'll discuss that more in subsequent videos. But in this particular case, where the problem is it is not known how doctoral students retell and reflect on their experience with videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees, we have a simple flow into how do doctoral students retell and reflect on their experiences with videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees. The question is in the middle of the research problem statement. And in the spirit of repetition, we're going to wrap this up by talking about the phenomenological purpose statement. And as you guessed it, it's method plus design, but that Lego block is now phenomenological, plus the problem, plus the sample, and plus the location. Here we are at our fourth example of a purpose statement, and it's probably becoming no mystery to you that copy and paste is our friend in creating aligned and concise problem statements, purpose statements, and research questions. So again, we take the problem statement, it is not known how doctoral students describe their lived experience and make meaning of videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees, and we turn that into the purpose statement, where the purpose of this qualitative phenomenological study is to explore how doctoral students describe their lived experience and make meaning of videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees within a university cohort in the Northwestern US. In our final example of building our own research question, we turn to phenomenology. As I noted in the beginning, phenomenology has many different flavors, and that's a discussion for another time. But if we continue on with this very simplistic view, we simply take the research problem statement, it is not known how doctoral students describe their lived experience and make meaning of videos while pursuing their doctoral degree. And buried in that is the research question. How do doctoral students describe their lived experience and make meaning of videos while pursuing their doctoral degrees? I imagine at this point that we've done 4 of these, you can see this similar pattern where the research problem has in the middle of it their first research question. So what did we learn? We learned that the problem, the purpose, and the research questions can be broken down into somewhat simple approaches, almost formulaic. Now remember, when you get with your committee and your chair, these will be refined and they'll become more sophisticated. But this should get you started. One tip before we wrap up, don't forget to download other dissertations from your institution and see how they've handled it, because that's often a good clue what will work at your institution. I hope this video was of value to you, and soon I'll be having more come out. Next we'll be talking about quantitative studies. Hey, thanks for tuning in.